Merkel Media.
What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you are watching us on Rockfin, Odyssey, Band.video, Vigilante.tv, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, thank you so much. We appreciate the support. You can rate the show if you'd like. If you think we've done a good job, give us 5 stars, write a little review. You can share it with your friends and family. We appreciate that. Hey, are you going to be in New York City the weekend of 9/11? September 9th, 2023 is a Saturday. There's an event in Midtown Manhattan, Free World NYC. It's hosted by Billy Ray Valentine, my good friend. I'll be speaking there. Gardner Goldsmith will be there. John Brisson, Tony Arterburn, Wayne McCroy, Don Jeffries, and the great Richard Gage as well. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. If you're going to be there and spend the day with us, we'd love to have you. I think it's like $72 for the ticket, and it's good for the entire day. You get to see all the speakers, and so check it out. The link's in the description. Hope to see you there. Also, American Liberty Awards is they've nominated us for a bunch of awards, which is kind of crazy. Best Analysis Broadcast, Best Infobomb Creator, and Most Truth Revealing Book. Flattered. Thank you guys for doing that. They're going to have an award show August 12th, Saturday night in Austin, Texas, down on 6th Street. So if you're interested in voting for this or voting and then going to the event as well, go to AmericanLibertyAwards.com. It's their website. Take a look and vote for people. You'll be blown away at everybody who's nominated for a bunch of different categories. They have like 20 categories. It's pretty cool. So check it out and vote if you're up for it. It's the only sort of voting I will endorse. I wouldn't vote for any of these maniacs in 2024, but you can feel free to vote for me. Also, hey, thanks to our sponsors. They make this whole thing work. Chemical Free Body has been with us from the beginning. Tim James is making fantastic products that actually work. If you are somebody that wants to improve your health, you're going to have to do it yourself. That's the bad news. Nobody's coming to save you with regard to your health. It's going to be up to you. But the good news is there are some places that you can go where you won't get scammed. You'll find products that actually work. ChemicalFreeBody.com is a good place to start. Take a look. See what you think. Maybe you want the detox bundle. I've been through that program. I've been through that one, man. I know what that'll do to you. That'll lean you out, man. I almost quit. It was a bit much for me. So take a look. Detox bundle. Green 85 is a great one. Every single morning I start my day with that. I am not kidding. No exaggeration, no bullshit for this, for the purposes of an ad read. I honestly do every single morning. I feel great. I don't need enough vegetables. I feel like I kind of need that because I'm a little lacking in the vegetable department, but thank God I've got it. So if you're in the market, chemicalfreebody.com, promo code macro on your way out will save you a bunch of money for sure and get you free shipping as well. Also, thanks to our friends over at My Patriot Supply. They're making storable food. Storable food is in a ton of demand these days. Wow. I wonder why that is. I wonder why everybody wants to get storable food, because they see that the wheels are falling off this American experiment. They understand. The people get it. You want to have storable food to buy you some time to get through the madness. And My Patriot Supply has built a website for us, a landing page, preparewithmacroaggressions.com. The link is in the description if you don't want to write it all down. But you can get yourself set up in like 10 minutes, real easy. Couple months supply, 6 months supply, 3 months supply, whatever. Get yourself a couple buckets of food, put them away someplace where you don't need to see it every day. And then you've got it. You've got it if there's an earthquake or a hurricane or some event happens, supply chain, government fuckery, you name it. It's all on the table. It's a whole possibility these days, you know. It's all happening, as Alex says. Preparewithmacroaggressions.com is a good place for you to go. Get yourself taken care of. Get those close to you taken care of too. Maybe drop ship some of a couple months of food to your family if they're out of state, or you've got a sister who thinks you're crazy, and you're like, well, you may think I'm crazy, but I'm going to save you with this food. There you go. You're welcome. So Christmas is coming. Christmas is coming up. You want to get the shittiest gift in the world? I got you storable food for Christmas. Merry Christmas, honey. Get out. Yeah. Well, listen. I'll tell you. I wound up down a rabbit hole, as I often do. This is not the worst one to go down, by the way. I was watching interviews with Anthony Sutton. Are you familiar with him? He's just amazing, man. He's a guy. I think he died in 2002, but he was a writer for many, many years. Wrote some really important books. Talk about a guy that saw it from a different angle. He really could just explain things in a way that made sense. In his interviews, he's very clear and concise, very intelligent. He's got a British accent. Let's not discount that too, right? You can say the dumbest things in the world, but if you've got that accent, you sound like you automatically get like 8 IQ points just for that. But he's got that, and he happens to also be really smart, and he's making some great points. And he's talking about a subject that we're going to get in here. We're going to get into here because it's one of those things that you hear it, and then you start to go, how does this all work, right? You hear that the capitalists were actually the people that financed communism. And you go, why? What, they're capitalists. Why would they finance such a weird worldview? Isn't that like diametrically opposed to their way of life? Yeah, 100%. It is exactly the opposite of what they think you should actually be doing. And Anthony Sutton did great work on this. In fact, there's like a three book series that he put out: Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, Wall Street and the Rise of FDR, or Wall Street and the Financing of FDR, and another one. I'll find it here somewhere. But anyway, there were 3 of them, and just did an amazing job on explaining this really weird concept: why rich capitalists would have any interest at all in getting involved in socialism. And so it requires kind of a unique way of coming at this problem. But he lays it out in a very logical manner, and I appreciate him for that. And it's not just this. It's not just talking about how the Bolshevik Revolution was financed, but hell, how Hitler was financed too. And you start to dig in it, and you go, well, Adolf Hitler was a really bad guy, and therefore he was financed by a bunch of other really bad guys, Germans, a bunch of bad German guys. And you go, have you looked into who financed Hitler? Because it might have been some bad German guys in there too, but mostly it was supposed to be the good American guys that were financing Hitler. And then you bring that in, and someone says, you're anti-Semitic for saying that. And you go, well, I don't know what it has to do with being anti-Semitic. It's just kind of a fact, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how World War I, World War II, Vietnam, all these world wars or regional wars that are sold to us as being good versus evil. And of course, we're always on the good side. We're never on the evil side. But good versus evil, us being good. Okay. What you find is that the evil side, surprisingly and consistently, is always financed by the quote good side. It's really weird that that's how it works. So let's talk. Let's jump in. This is going to be kind of a combo. We're going to talk a little bit about Anthony Sutton, and we're going to about the books that he wrote because they're so impactful. But we're also going to allow ourselves to go off on some tangents about the topics that he was writing about. So when he's writing about Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, you're going, well, that's 100+ years ago. Why does that even matter? Well, I'll tell you why it matters. It matters because the tactics that were used back then, even though times have changed, technology's changed, the concepts haven't really. And the idea of financing your enemy and the idea of creating an enemy out of thin air so that you have somebody to fight and therefore you can run this game. This is something that the Predator class has been doing for quite a while. And I think we're just finally starting to catch up to this and go, oh yeah, this is a really weird tactic that they use, because you just assume you assume the bad guys have always been bad and have always kind of been around and that they were, at some point you had to fight them. What you wind up realizing is that they weren't around at all. They were disorganized until the people with money, the capitalists, came in and financed them, got them organized, got money to them, got them some sort of structure set in place so that they could then grow into the bad guys that the good guys hoped they would be, so that then they could fight. You and me, we're just like, why does there have to be a fight at the end? Why do you have to grow the bad guys? Why can't we all just be good guys? Could we all just be good? Could you capitalists just be capitalists and not create bad guys to fight? Or is that just part of the deal? So it seems insane to talk about it like as if, it's WWE. It is pro wrestling at the highest levels. Once you get up there, it's pro wrestling. Looks real. The people are real. The guys are really big. They're really doing the jumps and flips and chokes and they're doing all that. There's some tricks that make it look like it hurts a lot more than it does. And there's tables that are sort of easier to break. And then you flip a guy and he lands on a table and the table breaks. Oh, dude, broke a table with that guy. Yeah, I did. But do you know the quality of that table? Well, it looked pretty good to me. But did you examine it? No. So there's little tricks. There's perception tricks. There's ways that you can give the appearance that these two guys really hate each other. And of course, they sell it in the pre-fight. In the pre-fight in a fake wrestling match, or in the pre-fight in the run-up to war. Like, oh, we hate these guys, man. We got to get them. We're going to get them. And they build up this whole thing. Like, if we don't fight them there, then they're going to fight, come get us here. And you're like, oh shit, they're going to come get us. Like, oh yeah, they're going to come get us. And you're like, well, we can't do that. Well, yeah, maybe do you want, we're going to have to fight these Al-Qaeda in the Middle East, or else they're going to come and get us here. Okay. I'll sit around waiting for that in terror for this guy to come get me, this invisible enemy. So Anthony Sutton laid this out in a way that made a lot of sense. He worked at the Hoover Institution, okay? And the Hoover Institution was like it was a big like think tank, and he was an author and historian, and he worked at this place up until 1975 when he split and wound up going independent. I mean, it's a nice way to put it. He split, but really they forced him out because he gave a presentation in Miami in 1972, and he started talking about things that were very inconvenient for the establishment. You have to understand, like, Vietnam had been going on for a little while, and it was starting to get 72, 73, 74, you're right in that era where a lot of body bags are coming home. Of course, filled with heroin. He likes to traffic heroin out and use corpses of American troops because the CIA is run by psychopaths. If you're unfamiliar with that story of the Golden Triangle and how of there, then by all means, feel free to make yourself enraged by looking into that one. But that's what happened. And it wasn't just body bags filled with heroin coming back. It was also satellite images that we were finally starting to see. Maybe not satellite images so much as spy plane images around that era, and picking up some interesting things that they were finding when they examined the footage. They found that what they found was that the trucks they were seeing, the North Vietnamese trucks that they were finding in these images, these spy images that were sort of involved in these skirmishes. They're looking at the trucks and they're going, these look like American trucks. I mean, I know they're North Vietnamese. I know they're not our trucks, but the shape of them, they look like American truck designs. And what was happening was that they were seeing trucks that were built in Russia. They were seeing in North Vietnam, the images is where they were taking the images, but the trucks were from the Russians, right? Because the Russians the Soviets were financing the North Vietnamese. And these trucks were coming from the Soviet Union, but they looked American, kind of. Like, more than kind of. They looked American. And it was confusing the people that were examining these. Well, Anthony Sutton knew exactly what was going on. When he took a look at the pictures, he said, well, these are coming from the Gorky plant in Soviet Russia. And they said, how do you know that? He said, well, how do you not? And they said, well, what do you mean? You can tell what plant they're coming from? And he said, yeah, they're coming from a Gorky plant in the Soviet Union. This Gorky plant has a General Motors partnership. You guys know that, right? And they're like, what? He's like, yeah, they've taken American truck designs and started making them in the factories that General Motors helped finance and build for the Soviets. And they're like, wait, so you're talking about American truck manufacturing facilities in the Soviet Union? And Anthony Sutton is like, yeah, where have you guys been for the last 30 years? Asleep at the wheel? This was happening during World War II as well. So so he's giving this presentation in Miami in 1972, telling the audience in the satellite images, all those NVA trucks that you see in there, they're all coming out of an American-financed, American-built factory in the Soviet Union. So in essence, we're fighting the enemy with trucks that we built. And that, of course, would rightly outrage people. Now, you're in the middle of the Vietnam War, and the Hoover Institution was like, you cannot be giving these presentations where you explain how this works. It's totally mental. And look, what it showed to the people that were having their brains cracked open by this presentation was that the capitalists and the communists were in business together. And they thought, how could that be? We were told that they were diametrically opposed to one each other from an ideological standpoint. You see the world too differently for us to be together, work together, live together, or whatever. And yet they're working together. That was weird. So he also talked about this. Anthony Sutton talked about how there was another quasi-American truck manufacturing facility in the Soviet Union that was 36 square miles big, which is like 6 miles long by 6 miles wide. That's how big the facility was. It was known as the Kama River plant. And they were building APC, armored personnel carriers, and Soviet trucks in this manufacturing facility. Now, the cover story was that this big 36 square mile facility was Italian, operating in the Soviet Union. They said, well, is that a Soviet plant? And they said, no, it's actually an Italian plant making Fiats, manufacturing Fiat cars, not fiat currency, but Fiat the cars. Both suck. But everyone knew that was that was a cover story. That wasn't true. Once you dug into it even just a little bit, you realize it's an awfully big facility just to be making Fiat Italian cars for the Russian market. I don't know if I'm buying that. Well, what it was that it was building out American designed trucks and APCs that were financed by Western money, had been financed a long time ago, building up our enemies while filling the pockets of these oligarchs in America that were running automobile manufacturing companies. So look, what they saw in the Vietnam pictures was new to them, but it wasn't new. Conceptually, it had been going on for a while. And it wasn't even new when you find the 36 square mile facility in Russia that's actually building out American style trucks for the Soviets to use. You go, well, that's unusual, but even that's not new because it was happening in World War I as well. We'll get to that too. So I guess if you wanted to ask the question, what's Anthony Sutton's main focus on all the books he's written? And there's a variety of them. He covers a lot of topics. He would have liked this show. I'll tell you, I would have liked, I like his stuff. I think he would have been interested in these areas that we get into because these are sort of areas that he covered as well. And, he was of the belief that big business, or what he wound up calling the monopoly capitalists of the time, he said that they loved financing socialism and communism, which is a weird thing to discover, that the rich capitalists are big fans of communism and socialism, not as an ideology that they would want to participate in. It's a little different than that. They liked the idea of capitalism for them, let's say in America. And when we talk about these guys, we're talking Rockefellers, Carnegies. These guys are in early 1900s groups. They liked capitalism for themselves, and yet they were financing communism and socialism. The question is why? Why would they be doing that? The answer is they would rather have communists than competitors. And they knew that as long as those groups stayed communist or socialist, they weren't going to be much of a threat to them from a capitalistic standpoint. They weren't going to if you owned Amazon and you've got a really good thing going, and now this Soviet Union over there is going through some big changes and they're about to change, they're about to go through some governmental switch, and you run Amazon, you go, whatever they do, I don't want them to be capitalist, because what if they build a better Amazon? Then we're in trouble. I'll tell you what, one thing that'll keep them from even having the possibility of building a better mousetrap than us here in the West is, why don't we get them all enthusiastic about communism? And then they can go get involved. They can go push communism. And we know that's not going to go anywhere. We know that's going to fizzle out, but it's going to do a couple things. By financing communism and socialism in these other countries, they actually ended up with a controlled monopoly that they were in charge of, a captured market, so to speak. So they dealt with the governments of the communist countries and sold them all kinds of things that were needed in this communist utopia that was never really going to take off. But they knew that they could send them all their machines and they could do all that stuff. And the communists were never going to thrive because they weren't going to figure out how to run the machines. They weren't going to figure out, they were going to have no financial incentive to copy them from a capitalistic standpoint and make a bunch of them that were even better and then start businesses. There's no option for that. So they knew that they were going to have basically a controlled market that they could sell their products to the bosses of, who could then from top down install it and say, we're going to be doing it this way. So Standard Oil stood out as a particularly slimy monopoly run by the treacherous Rockefeller clan, right? And Standard Oil loved working with these groups. They knew there was no competition to them, really. Even though Russia has all this oil, they knew that these guys are going to figure out how to get it out of the ground. We know how to get it out of the ground. So if they want to work with us, if they need this, we'll work with them. For sure. We're interested in making money, and we'll even finance their stupid government. so that they can have, so that their ideology, so that we can have a bunch of people that'll grow up and never compete with anybody. That's why rich people are so interested in getting involved in the education system, like the Rockefellers and Bill Gates, not because they are enthusiastic about raising the quality of the education inside the country. No. They want to make sure that they control what you think and exactly how much you know. And so they want to finance you so that you can grow up to either work in their factory or be just smart enough to work the machines, as George Carlin said. But also, they want to make sure they don't have competition. So there's only very few people that get the sorts of education that they get. I mean, if you get a public school education in the United States, good luck to you. You're up against insurmountable odds to break out of that and have success and understand banking and understand finance, personal finance and corporate finance and marketing and all these things. This is an education you're not going to get. That's inaccessible to most people, just the way they want it. So you can never really excel. You can certainly never catch them. You certainly aren't going to be a threat to their monopoly. So they like this stuff. And so by financing socialism, they actually ended up with what they wanted, which is a monopoly all along. Remember, they don't want the Rockefellers, Carnegies. The Rockefellers believed that competition was a sin. So they're certainly not out there trying to create competitors. They're trying to create customers, but they know that these people aren't ever going to become competitors, because as long as you have a communist or socialist mindset, you're never going to excel. And they know that. The communists don't know it. And the socialists don't know it. They're always the last to figure it out. They don't figure it out until a bullet goes through the back of their head when they're lined up against the wall. That's when it occurs to them, oh, I remember now. This whole system is stupid and doesn't ever work. That's right. Bang. 1917, Wall Street sent $1 million to the Bolsheviks in order to finance socialism. $1 million in 1917 is a lot of money. They used the Red Cross as cover so that they could manage the Bolsheviks from inside. They sent a group through the Red Cross, with the Red Cross, and into Russia. And what was interesting about the group that they sent with this Red Cross, you're sending doctors and nurses, and they're like, fuck no, we're sending bankers and lawyers. That's what they sent in with the Red Cross, because it was not about the Red Cross. It wasn't about health or taking care of wounded people or whatever. It was about using the Red Cross as a shield to deflect any sort of observation or criticism or anybody digging into what you guys are actually doing. And they used that to deflect away from the fact that they sent bankers and lawyers in there to manage this whole process from inside. So they weren't doing it from outside. They wanted to make sure they had people in there. And this $1 million that they used to finance the Bolsheviks, basically this is how it works. They didn't want any competition to the current scam that they were running. So they paid to turn all these people into commies, not competitors. That's it. That's really like the easy version of it. So who was behind this $1 million? Who was behind the financing of this? I said Wall Street, but it was more than just Wall Street. It was the United States, the UK, and Germany who financed the Bolshevik Revolution. And you think, oh, well, I that's not what my history books told me. Well, your history books should be burned, because your history books are full of lies. So that's 1917. First batch of money comes pouring in from the West in order to finance the revolution. You get 6 years into it, 1923, Vladimir Lenin is in charge, and the Russian factories have all been shut down. They in their haste to create this Bolshevik revolution and to seize the means of production, they forgot a very important thing. They all didn't know how to read. Percent of Russia was illiterate, and the people that were getting whipped up into a frenzy, these Bolshevik They were just an unruly, unthinking mob of dummies that couldn't read or write and didn't know how to do anything. So they're taking the managers and the CEOs, so to speak, out of these factories, putting them up against the wall and shooting them all without anyone explaining to them how to actually run the factories. So the factories are just sitting there doing nothing for years, right? And then in 1922, the Russian factories were restarted in a program that allowed foreign corporations to come in to Russia and restart the factories that had all the managers that they had shot years earlier. And this was the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Italy. And they came in and brought their smart guys who knew how to run the factories, and they reopened the factories as American factories, or French, or Italian. But they brought in the internationals to take over the manufacturing because they didn't know how to do it anymore. They had factories with no factory workers, and they had factories and machines without anybody that knew how to run the machines. So that's kind of like communism in a nutshell. Like, don't be a murderous thug, but if you do, remember not to shoot the guy that knows how, has the keys to the vault, that sort of thing. They brought in General Electric, came in. This is 1923. This is 100 years ago. General Electric came in, DuPont came in, Ford Motors came in. I mentioned the Gorky plant. Ford Motors was running that. Averell Harriman came in and took over the manganese plants. Arm & Hammer came in and took over the pencil factories, which sounds kind of like a joke, but it's 1923. If you own a pencil factory in Russia that makes all the pencils for Russia, you're doing pretty well. And Arm & Hammer was like a billionaire at the time anyway, so it didn't matter. They took over these factories in the Soviet Union, and they took over these entire industries. Sound familiar? Sound like when the Soviet Union broke up and all those oligarchs stepped in and took over like the potash industry and took over the aluminum industry, and Roman Averov came in, and all these guys that Kolomorsky came in, all these oligarchs came in and just took industries. Like, I'm going to take the zinc industry, and you go, that's not very sexy. You're like, I'm going to be worth $8 billion in about a month. Like, okay. So that's what happened. That's what happened recently, 1990s in the Soviet Union when it broke up. And that's what happened in 1923 when it had the Bolshevik revolution. The idea that they were like antithetical to the West was only, was believed by most people. But the truth is, when they fell behind and couldn't figure out how to get all this stuff up and running, who did they go to? They went to the West. And the West said, we'll come in and we'll run everything and we'll build everything. So the Western companies ran and built everything in the Soviet Union back then, back in the 20s. The Soviets weren't building that stuff. They didn't know how to do it. They couldn't read or write. Most of their people were straight out of the farms. So they were of no help, but the Americans knew how to do it. So this is the reason why capitalists also finance socialists and communists, because they know that they'll fuck it up at some point and they'll have to come in and fix it. And that's exactly what wound up happening. So technology was moving from the West to the East. We've seen this now happen from kind of a replay. In this case, it was moving to like the Soviet Union. The American technology was moving to the Soviet Union. They were giving them technology. They're just saying, here you go, figure this out. In order to build up an enemy, which is also a new customer for them. But, the same thing is kind of happening now, where we're sending technology to China. The Clintons have been selling U.S. patents and technology to China since the 90s. So they do that to help kickstart and finance an enemy. I mean, it's a weird way to say thank you, giving them this material or this knowledge, trade secrets, whatever. It's an interesting way to send it over to them so that they'll build themselves up so that you can later murder them. Sounds like something Rumsfeld would have thought of. So let's talk about this. Standard Oil. Standard Oil was the company that was owned by the Rockefellers, and then they went through an antitrust thing and they broke Standard Oil up into a bunch of pieces, and each one of those pieces was still super valuable. In fact, probably more valuable. And they loaned money to the Germans during World War II to build out, actually in the lead up to World War II. They loaned money to the Germans to build out the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and opened up lines of credit that they would need, and it really took care of them. They were a huge customer, and there was a component to the German war machine that later came about as the war took off and they started to really thrive and they were building a ton of airplanes, and they were building everything that they needed. But there was one problem, like one kind of small problem. It seemed like a small problem, but it was a small item, but it was a big problem. And that was that the aviation oil additive that was necessary for all of these Luftwaffe planes that they needed in order to make sure that it had the right octane level, that additive only came from one place and one place only: Standard Oil. So Standard Oil, the Rockefellers, had a monopoly on this fuel additive for airplanes. They could have very easily said, "We're not selling it to you. You're the enemy. You're the Germans. We're in World War II. Haven't you read the paper? I'm not going. Your Luftwaffe is bombing the UK. Your Luftwaffe is bombing the Russians. You're bombing the Belgians. You're bombing everybody. You're bombing the Italians, and you've already murdered the French. Now you're starting bombing runs in Norway. We're not going to give you this additive that's going to allow you to continue flying airplanes. We're going to prevent you from having this additive, and that'll end the war immediately." But Standard Oil didn't do that. They kept selling it to them. Do you know why? Because the Rockefellers don't give a flying fuck or innocent people or anything. They're in the depopulation. War is great for business. War is great for depopulation. It's everything that they want. Why would they ever stop providing the enemy the one thing they need to keep the war going? And so they didn't. And I want you to just understand, Standard Oil is the Rockefeller nations. And when their subsidiaries, the World Health Organization, try to tell you, I want you to just remember that the parent company sold the fuel additives to the Nazis to keep the war machine going. So if they really loved you, why would they do that? The answer is they don't love you. It's very frustrating. They also gave them something that was oil from coal technology in Germany. It allowed this came from the Rockefellers as well in Standard Oil, but allowed them to turn their coal into oil. It wasn't the best quality oil, but it provided the opportunity for Germany once again to hang in there in the war. It provided gasoline for the German war machine and all that good stuff. So, if you want to talk about like who was instrumental in World War III and starting World War III and ending World War II, I should say. Fuck World War III, we're going to get there. But during World War II, Standard Oil was trading with the enemy, and Prescott Bush was financing it with Brown Brother Harriman, and almost was hanged for his crimes. So, but let's continue. Let's continue on this Standard Oil Rockefeller Nazi connection, because boy, Rockefellers, and you go wrong with that. I.G. Farben, a very staunch Third Reich, had a technology swap deal in place with Standard Oil, and this allowed the Nazis to get synthetic oil from I.G. Farben, and I.G. Farben was getting the synthetic oil from Standard Oil because of their technology swap that they had in place before World War II even started. So again, if you want to stop the German war machine, you cripple the fuel that they need. And you have the ability to, I mean, you fantasize about doing that. If you're some general, you're like, we're going to go blow up the fuel depots in Baku, Azerbaijan, right? That'll be a good place to, we'll take them out from that southern flank so they won't be able to refuel there. And you're like, if we can only get there in time, but how are we going to mount to, hopefully, the Germans, hopefully they don't go there and grab those Caspian oil fields. Instead, hopefully they divert and get caught up in some war in St. Petersburg, which is exactly what wound up happening. And it's the reason why the Germans wound up losing the war, is because they pivoted and went there instead of securing the oil. All along, you could have shut off the oil if the Rockefellers wanted to. It would have been over. The war would have come to a grinding halt, literally grinding the gears, as there was no more oil for the German war machine. All this technology was coming from the U.S. The synthetic oil itself was coming from the U.S., going to the Germans. There were joint patents that were shared by IG Farben and Standard Oil. Plus, they had interlocking boards of directors, which added this further blending of the two companies together. So again, you've got guys on the board of directors of IG Farben that are also on the board of directors for Standard Oil. So they're in business together. They're partners together. They may come from different sides of the planet, but they're both in the chemical business, and they intended to work together. And this pesky war wasn't going to stop them. In fact, the war was going to make them both rich. So, far from trying to prevent communism, America's too busy selling products to the communists to help them build all kinds of technology, including their nuclear technology. That's a very interesting side note to this. But from 1944 all the way through the end of the war in 1945, the Soviet Union was being sent nuclear bomb material from the United States. We were giving it to them. Now they were our allies during this, of course, for a little bit. No, nobody really trusted the Russians. I mean, the West, the Brits and the Americans didn't really trust the Russians, and the Russians didn't really trust us either. So, but we gave them technology, and that was heavy water, which was definitely needed. I know that the Norwegians had that. That's one of the reasons why the Germans had that relationship with Norway, was to get access to the heavy water. But the Russians had it too, and it came from America. So the Americans were sending heavy water. They were sending aluminum tubes. Oh shit. Saddam Hussein would like a word. Aluminum tubes. Aluminum tubes. That's the last time we started talking about that. I got some democracy dropped on my ass. So we sent those to the Soviets as well, and we sent them graphite. We sent them the things that you needed to make a nuclear bomb. Fuck, if I didn't know any better, I'd think we were trying to give Soviets nuclear technology, which of course is exactly what was going on. We were trying to give them nuclear technology while at the same time showing them with Hiroshima and Nagasaki what would happen to them if they got on the wrong side of us in a nuclear war. So we kickstarted their nuclear program on purpose because we needed an adversary for what we were going to face in the future, which was going to be a nuclear Cold War. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into nuclear Cold Wars, let's talk about Hitler a little bit more, especially with regard to the financing of him. Because you have this belief that it had to have been the Bundesbank, the German central banks that were doing the financing. There must have been some, Fritz Thyssen and Krupp and these guys that were German industrialists with a lot of money. Did they finance the war? Yeah, probably. Yeah, for sure. I mean, they were involved in that. So there's German money coming in. But did you see how big the Third Reich was? Did you see those parades that they had and everything that was going into it? That required external financing. I mean, you weren't going to be able to do all of that in-house. And they didn't. And they had help. And the help for Adolf Hitler in his rise to power, we're talking like 1933 when he comes to power, the people that were financing him were Americans. Names that you would know very well. You've heard of Henry Ford, haven't you? Well, the Ford plant in Cologne, Germany was It's a Ford plant. It was under, they gave it cover. I think they covered it under like Opel or something. They changed the name of the company, but the facility was built to American specifications and standards. And it wasn't just one Ford facility, but there were, they built many of them. The one in Cologne, Germany, which was a very prosperous facility, had an interesting thing happen. It operated through the entire war, building all kinds of trucks and heavy equipment that the Germans needed that came from this plant that was financed by Henry Ford, by the Ford company. Very, very lucky lifespan for it because never got bombed. Isn't that weird? Nobody ever, of all the bombs that were dropped on Germany, there was never a bomb that fell on this Ford plant. But that must have been a coincidence, right? Because that would have never happened anywhere else. I mean, certainly General Electric, when General Electric partnered up with German AG, and they built 10 factories in Germany. General Electric, an American company, was partnered in Germany with has a German General Electric German AG was the name of the German subsidiary of General Electric. And they had 10 factories operating in Germany for the entire war. You want to know how many of those 10 factories were bombed into smithereens? 0. Must have been a lucky, 6-year period. International Telegraph and Telephone, ITT, all the way up until 1944, ITT, an American company, wasn't just financing the Germans. They were financing Himmler directly. Like till the last couple of months of the war, they were still financing him. Made parts for the German Luftwaffe planes. I mean, they were making parts for the German Air Force. IG Farben. I mentioned that before. They shared patents. They shared boards of directors with Standard Oil. They were partners with Standard Oil. IG Farben existed after World War II as well. Certain factories were off limits to bombing in World War II. Now, you would like to think, obviously there's a lot of chaos and bombs fell all over the place and we didn't have smart bombs back then. They were dumb bombs. You opened up bomb bay doors and they fell out. And sometimes they fell on the right targets and sometimes they fell on the wrong targets. And so even if you were trying to not hit these, seems like randomly you might have got hit at some point. They never did. They just never ever did, which I think goes to, I think it goes to advanced knowledge of what was happening. It shows that we had some industrial capacity inside Europe that we thought was more important than winning the war, which is crazy to me. Considering everything that happened, all of the millions of dead people, especially dead Americans, for America to make that calculation, that you're going to, I would think it would be like, well, we'll try not to blow up your Ford factory in Cologne, Germany, but, I'm not going to go out of my way to not bomb it. Actually, truth be told, I would say, show me where these 10, factories are that General Electric German AG built and where the Ford factories are. Show me on the map where they are. And then the next hour I would be sending a bombing campaign to obliterate it. And I would say, sue us. You, Henry Ford, you, David Rockefeller versus the American government, sue us. But they didn't do that. None of their facilities got bombed. You know why? Because they run the government. Don't ever forget that. It's all about power. Occidental Petroleum, you've heard of them, right? The Arm & Hammer was the founder of them, known as a capitalist oil billionaire guy 50 years ago. Just to prove that ideology is nothing, about Arm & Hammer. What you don't know about his father. His father was a guy named Julius Hammer. And not as cool of a name, by the way, Julius Hammer, but he was the Secretary General of the American Communist Party. Isn't that interesting? Your son is now running the Occidental Petroleum business, a billionaire company, billionaire family back in the early 1900s. And the dad is running the American Communist Party. That seems incongruent. And yet here we are. And I think that's just that there's really no difference at the top between capitalists, monopolists, the Rockefeller, Rothschilds, Arm and Hammers of the world, and socialists. There's no, you think there's going to be a big difference between them, or maybe they wear different colored uniforms, I guess. But really, what you find out is that they're all the same. It's just about power and control. It's a matter of how you go about doing it. But the industrialists decide that they're going to have power and control by making as much money as possible and then exerting their will on others. Whereas the socialists and communists use the boot of the state to do that. But they still get to the same place. They still want the same things. They want power and they want control. They just want it in different flavors. In fact, they kind of need each other in a weird way. American big business financed the USSR and encouraged the building of the nuclear threat after World War II. You think that was all Russia's idea or the Soviet Union's idea to have this big nuclear threat? No, in actuality, it was America's idea to get them involved in that in order to justify bigger budgets, to perpetuate never-ending need for military security. But Occidental Petroleum, this Arm and Hammer company, that they operated inside the Soviet Union for decades, for a long time. When I mentioned they brought the crews in from the West to help run these factories because they didn't know how to run them. We've got all this oil here. We're here in the Soviet Union. We've got endless amounts of oil. We've got these oil facilities, but we don't know what any of the switches and knobs do. And Occidental Petroleum said, "Step aside. We're taking over now." And so they operated in Russia for a long, long time. It wasn't a big secret. America loaned, this will infuriate you, but kind of back to sort of when we were talking about Vietnam, recognizing that the NVA trucks looked kind of American to you. America loaned the Soviet Union $40 billion back in the 70s, back when $40 billion actually was worth something. And that money was used to purchase arms and vehicles that could be given to the North Vietnamese to be used against Americans. Literally financing the enemy in a war created by these fucking bankers and psychopaths. You finance the enemy with $40 billion. The enemy says, "Thank you. We certainly could use this. What are you intending to spend it on?" "Oh, we're going to spend it on trucks and weapons and all that good stuff." So Russia developed this thing called the MERV, MERV. It's a multiple rocket reentry missile, right? It's they needed this for their ballistic missiles. And much like this Standard Oil situation, the only place that you could get the very specific type of ball bearings that were needed for these missiles, you could only get them in one place. You could only get the machine that made the ball bearings from one company, and Russia didn't have it. So they couldn't make these multiple rocket reentry missiles, the MERVs. They couldn't make them. They needed them to create and launch interballistic missiles, but they couldn't get there. They just couldn't do it. They didn't have the ball bearings. It's all about ball bearings these days. Very Fletchian of them. So instead of that ending their aspirations for intercontinental ballistic missiles that they could use to fight Americans, instead of, them having to go back to the drawing board or throwing their hands up and saying, "Well, I guess we're screwed now. We don't have access." Instead, they just had Henry Kissinger send them 45 of them in 1972. Henry Kissinger just sent them 45 of these machines that were only made by one company that could make the machine. And then that machine could make the ball bearings that were needed. America only had 30 of them at the time. Henry Kissinger sent 45 to the Soviet Union, more than what America had. So when you hear me talk about Henry Kissinger and what a reprehensible scumbag he is, you have to understand there's so much more to this story, you know. They were clearly building up the threat of nuclear war by people inside the American government. It's disgusting. 80% of Soviet Union's ship engines were built in the West. So, like, again, if you didn't want the Soviet Union to have ships, you would then not sell them the engines for their ships. Considering the West builds 80% of them, we're just going to not sell them to you, right? I mean, this makes perfect sense to me. They sold them to them anyway, right? So it's like we need another team to fight. Who are we going to fight? I don't know. Well, there isn't another team to fight. Well, make one. Make a team to fight. Well, there's a team over there, but they don't have access to the fuel additives for their airplanes. They don't have access to the ball bearings that they need for their long-range missiles. They don't have access to the ship engines or anything. Oh, don't worry. We'll give them all those things. We'll sell them to them so that they can play with us in this game. It's frustrating. Trilateral Commission. Let's talk about this because Anthony Sutton talked about trilaterals quite a bit. David Rockefeller Foundation, and Zbigniew Brzezinski are the co-founders of the Trilateral Group. Ford Foundation donated a lot of money to the Trilaterals. You remember the Ford Foundation. They're the ones that were building truck plants in facilities in the Soviet Union while we were at war with the Soviet Union. You remember them, right? So the idea of trilaterals is you're going to have three sections. You're going to have Japan, US, and Europe. And they're going to prioritize banking, international trade, mostly international Zionist bankers in New York. That was the priority there. They made sure that the media wouldn't allow any discussions of this to go on. No leaks, no stories, none of that. And about half the members of the Trilateral Commission are also members of the Council on Foreign Relations. So a lot of overlap in these groups. Jimmy Carter was a trilateral. Walter Mondale was a trilateral. All senior members of the Carter administration, all key controlling positions within his government were trilaterals. Sound familiar? Sound like the Biden administration? Because it is. Susan Rice, Anthony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden, they're all trilaterals as well. You have to put your membership on ice while you do that, but then you recycle back in. In fact, during the Jimmy Carter administration, there were 18 total in the Carter administration, 18 of them. So again, it makes you just wonder, where's your loyalty? To America? Probably not. George H.W. Bush was a trilateral. No surprise there. And I think that what these people have figured out through the creation of these groups is that they would just, I would describe them, this New World Order group, as corporate internet. And they seek world government, not necessarily through like troops on the street and tanks on every corner, but more like world governance through interlocking boards of directors that they sit on and they control. So that's kind of how I see them. Trilaterals, borders, they want to homogenize countries and make you less proud of where you are. They want to take away the things that you rah for and replace it with migrants that you don't like and don't speak your language and don't have your culture and don't have your customs, and they want you fighting with each other because that's what they're trying to do. Destroy national sovereignty. They don't care about that stuff. And so that's kind of where we were. That's where we are. I would advise people to go take a look at his work, man. Grab some of his books. He wrote a book on the Federal Reserve conspiracy, so he understands about that. He knew that bank was a covert private banking cartel with monopolistic powers. He was well aware of that. So you got to love that. He wrote about how Jekyll Island Federal Reserve Bank was supposed to be portrayed as a series of regional banks, not a central bank. They wanted the general public to think, oh, it's just regional banks. Like, we've got feds in all these different cities. Look at, they're just regional banks. When in actuality, because then if they're split up and there's like a dozen of them, how centralized could you really be? Well, they were centralized. It was a central bank, but they gave the perception that they were decentralized by having them in various cities. But in actuality, it was the Federal Reserve was always going to be a central bank. And so, interesting I've got a lot to read. I've got a lot of books to read. He wrote a book about Skull and Bones back in 1983 through publisher Trine Day. So shout out to Chris Milligan. And he did Whitney Webb's book too. So that's it, man. Don't sleep on Anthony Sutton's work. He's doing outstanding things, talking about these global communist, capitalist mergers and all of it. It's a weird concept, the idea of capitalism and in communism coexisting. But once you understand the duality of all of this, then I guess it makes a little bit more sense. Hey, if you like this episode, you can take the additional step right now of sharing it with your friends and family. You can follow me on Twitter at Macroaggression. You can find the website, the octopus of globalcontrol.com. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you again soon.